Hello, welcome to the Diana Chivoka podcast, all about mental health. Today's episode is all about the importance of priorities. I'll be talking about priorities and how important they impact our mental health and some tips for prioritizing effectively. So sit back, relax, and let's enjoy our episode. I'll start by telling you a quick story. My mother once told me that life is about choices, and with every choice, there is a sacrifice. And in the end, life is about priorities. And she was right. This week, I'm talking about prioritizing, how prioritizing can change your life. A question came to me from Sarah from Lunguja, from Uganda, all the way, and she was asking, Miss Diana, how do we get crystal clear on what is important so that you can focus every single day on what actually matters to you? In other words, she was asking me, how do we get to prioritize? How do we prioritize? And she made me realize how important it is to help people understand how priorities and prioritizing life is important to our everyday life and our mental health and mental well-being. And first things first, let's define what we mean exactly by priorities. Priorities are the things that are most important to us. They are the things that we value primarily, the things that we're willing to make sacrifices for, and the things that we want and we want to focus our time and energy on. Those are the priorities. Those are what are the priorities in our lives. Let me give you an example. One example is, let's say you are a busy professional with a family. Your priority might include spending time with your spouse, your children, and advancing your career, or staying healthy and staying active. So these are the three things that matters to you, that matters the most to you, and you want to make sure that you are dedicated and dedicating your time and attention to them because they're so important. They're on top of your list. Another example, let's say you are someone who values mental health, and above all your list, you have things like self-care, and you want to prioritize everything that is concerning your mental well-being, like getting a good night's sleep, getting a regular exercise, eating health meal, and taking time to relax and unwind. Those are priorities to you. And no matter what happens in a day, you're going to put those things on top of your list. And in the long run, you benefit with your mental well-being, and mental health will benefit from prioritizing those three things because they're so important to you. So how do we prioritize? One caller asked me, and she said, Miss Diana, when we are not prioritizing the thing that matters to us, how does it affect our mental health? And this was my answer to her. I said, when you don't prioritize your mental health, it has a negative impact on your mental health and your mental well-being. You might feel stressed, you might be overwhelmed, you might be burnt out, and you might be struggling to cope with the challenges of a daily life. On the other hand, when you prioritize effectively, you are able to manage your stress, you're able to manage and balance and get a life of fulfillment. Another caller asked me, his name is Mike, and he said, he was calling from Nansen, and he said, Miss Diana, he says, I really like this podcast, and I thank you so much for the time you have dedicated to this podcast. He went ahead to ask, why is it that our children these days have lost interest in the things that matters the most? And how do we help the children to know what is important? Yep, he's concerned. My help was prioritize. My friend Mike, I'll tell you one thing. You are the reason I decided to dedicate this episode to priorities, because you brought my attention to something that concerns me the most, which is our children and the children's mental health. Kids these days, they don't know what is important and what's not important. We must redirect the children. We must redirect the children to explore and play and rediscover the beauty of life in every way. So getting back to the issue of priorities, a caller from Namayova asked me, her name is Sarah, she said, why are priorities so important? And how can we prioritize? So now that we know what priorities are, let us talk about why they are so important. Simply, let's put it, when we prioritize the things that matters the most, we can live a more fulfilling and satisfying life. And let me ask you, how often do you take time to ask yourself these questions? Am I prioritizing my life the right way? Am I putting the thing that matters the most on top of my list? If not, if you don't take time once a month or twice a month to think about the things that matters to you the most, my friend, you're not prioritizing your life. And this week, I'm going to talk to you about how to prioritize. And this is why I'm here to do just that. To discuss with you why it's important to prioritize in order and why is it so essential for good mental health. Because when we prioritize, we're able to focus our energy on the things that truly matters the most. The things that make us happy, rather than getting bogged down with the distractions of life, social media, obligations that have nothing to do with us. The things that don't align with our values. Because when we don't put our list in order with the things that are important, well, somebody else will take advantage of our time. So one of the famous authors once said, Stephen Covey once said, the key is not to prioritize what's on your schedule, but to schedule your priorities. In other words, we need to make sure we are putting the thing that matters the most on top of our to-do list, rather than letting our schedule dictate our priorities. And he was right. And another caller asked Susan, she said, how can we prioritize? How do we prioritize effectively? So how can we make sure we are prioritizing effectively the things that are really important to us? How do we know? So here are my few tips I suggested to Susan, one of the callers. So I suggest let's get started by on our prioritizing journey today. One of the authors, Zig Ziglar, once said, if you don't prioritize your life, someone else will. Someone else will occupy your time. In other words, if we are not intentional about what we are prioritizing, we might find ourselves being pulled in all directions and feeling like we're not making any kind of progress towards our goals. So what do we need to do? We must identify our values. Think about what matters the most. What are our values in life? Is it your family? Is it your career? Is it your health? And once you can identify your core values, you can start to prioritize your life accordingly. And listen to me. You must set specific goals. You cannot prioritize without setting goals. You must set specific goals. Once you know what you want to prioritize, it's important to set specific goals towards what you want to achieve. Goals that are measurable, goals that are in line with your priorities. For example, if you want to prioritize your health, you must set goals to exercise at least 30 minutes every day towards your goal of a good health. We must also learn to say no. There are times when we kind of get in all directions just because everybody needs you here, need you there, and you end up running in all directions. This can be tough. We must learn to say no. This can be tough because it's important to remember that every time we say yes to something that doesn't align with our priorities, we are saying no to something that does align to our priorities, meaning that we are neglecting ourselves and giving priority to something else. And the third thing is that we must be flexible. We must be flexible with our priorities because priorities shift. Priorities can change over time. So it's important to be flexible and willing to adapt as needed. Change things up. You cannot be fixed and don't change. Reevaluate your priorities and make adjustments as needed. As the circumstance changes, you change your priorities because commitments can change. They can cover, dedicate each day for the things that matters the most. It reminds me one of the famous motivational speakers, Tony Robbins, once said, "It's not about having the time, it's about making the time." In other words, we need to be intentional about how we're spending our time and make sure we are dedicating the things that matters the most. Your priorities are the things that give you the greatest importance to. The things you give more time to, the things you give the greatest importance, the things you put on top of the list. It's the stuff that matters to you the more. Anything else in the world, more than anything else in the world. Often, for most of us, it's aligned with the people, the places, bigger things, bigger concepts, spiritual notions, Some of them are not of greatest value, but we put them on top of our list. I see the notion of priorities as being close linked to self-awareness, personal growth. It's so related because when you prioritize what's important, you're most likely to grow. You're aware of what's going on. In other words, it's about really understanding who you are and being crystal clear and honest with yourself, and then challenging yourself to be the very best version of yourself. So make your priorities, align your priorities with those values that are so important to you, and being crystal clear about who you are and what you want to be, and set your priorities towards that, and being really consciously choosing and to think and act and be in line with what is important and be in line with what is your priority every single day is part of self-awareness, is part of self-care, is part of personal growth. So you may not get it all 100% all the time, but if you try by being aware and patient with yourself, you can find it, it becomes second nature to you. You do it every single day, knowing every week you wake up, you know what is coming first on top of your list. You have a plan for the rest of the week. You have a plan for the rest of the month. So we must be able to prioritize our life and put everything that is important on top of our list. What matters the most to us? And be really clear and be secure and protect and guard against our priorities and be in charge. Because if we don't do that and be really intentional with our lives and our priorities, we can really mess up. I'm all for going with the flow, but when you do that, you have no control over where you end up. Now you can never completely control your life, but other than somebody else driving you in all directions. So this episode is about prioritizing, being crystal clear on what's important to us, and learning to be able and be specific on what we need. Don't let just life happen to you, but create your life around your priorities. Working through your priorities isn't just creating some sort of ranking system for the things and people in your life. It is not a competition, and there are no winners or losers in the process, nor is it being clear about your priorities an excuse for not trying new things. We must be able to try new things. We must work through the process to know what's important and introduce new ideas as life changes, as new circumstances come into our lives. So this brings us to the end of this episode about prioritizing, and I hope you learn and you plan to prioritize your life so you can live a meaningful life. Join me next week as we talk about new habits. We learn more about our habits, our vision, and our purpose in life. And I hope you be there to tune in on this day as we talk about habits. Thank you so much for listening to me.